What's up, Movement Masters? And Shawn Mishka, Movement Master and OptimizeMovement.com, coming to you with another Shawn's Q&A. And today's Q&A video is going to be just a tad different. Over the past few weeks, Stuart McMillan, my man Stu, from down at Altus in Arizona, who just so happens to be one of the very brightest and smartest coaches I've ever had the pleasure of being around, began posting some thoughts on motor control and movement skill acquisition in sport from a number of points of view. And if you follow me here on Twitter or anywhere, I guess, on social media, you probably see me retweeting these out on the daily or sending them out, sharing them, etc. Or if you're in my close confidant circle, you probably have been receiving them directly from me each day. Well, late last week, Stu posted a few questions on one of those posts that were more than intriguing to someone like myself who's too overly obsessed about finding the most correct answer to very similar questions such as those that Stu posted. Thus, today's video is going to be a brief explanation of my thoughts on the matter at hand as it pertains to some of Stu's questions on that particular day's post. Before moving on to just that, I do want to say this, that I greatly admire what Stu has done with these posts, offering his thoughts. In fact, I feel as though some of us, or more of us I should say, in this field should be more willing to put out our thoughts like Stu did and say, I'm not sure if this is entirely right or wrong. But it's my combination of what I believe to be true at this moment in time from everything I've read and everything I've experienced and where my thoughts currently stand. Additionally, I have these questions that are swirling around in my head, and what do you all think of them? You know, to me, we should all attempt to engage in conversation just like that. Conversation that attempts to fill in the gaps that exist between theories and experiences, between science and art. However, you know, I can speak from firsthand experience here, being someone who often finds himself off the beaten path of traditionalist mindset, I can tell you that there is some risk in laying it out there like Stu did, as anything that you put out there is immediately open to criticism by the social media vultures and just by well-meaning coaches alike who are so often quick to criticize, yet so slow to lay their own thoughts out there. Additionally, of course, what Stu has been talking about are concepts and principles that are most definitely after my own heart. So of course, I'm strongly opinionated that these topics are those that should get discussed more and in depth across our professions. Thus, really with anything I'm about to say, I simply wanted to do exactly what Stu has been doing and take a stand with what I believe to be true from what I've learned and what I have experienced. All in all, a special shout out and thank you to my man Stu for enlightening us all in opening up this can of worms for it to be discussed more deeply. So enough rambling from me and on to Stu's questions and my answers, which will stand to highlight my stance. You know, the post that I'm referring to came just a few days ago, 3 days ago, on February 23rd. And Stu's main question or questions revolved around the concept of awareness during the execution of movement in sport. His main headings in his tweet read, is the expert mover just a passenger in his or her own body? Number one. Number two, is there an actively different or separate strategy for awareness and movement between practice and competition? And when looking deeper, Stu went on to say that he had essentially three main questions that he was exploring at that time. And I apologize for looking off screen here as I have to try to make sure I get these is put up, exactly the way that Stu said it. Number one, as it relates to a continuum of conscious awareness of skill, is there a difference between cyclical and non-cyclical sports? Number two, as it relates to the conscious awareness of skill, is there a difference between training and competition? Moreover, if it is agreed upon that the most efficient state during competition is non-conscious awareness, then do we actively attempt to move towards this state during practice? Do we spend more time on conscious awareness? Or do we organize our training to best oscillate between the two states? And finally, number 3, does the most elite performance require more or less conscious awareness? And is there a general rule determining this, or is it entirely intra-individual in nature? So again, I apologize for looking off screen there. I wanted to make sure I got Stu in his wording. But that's some pretty heavy and involved stuff there, right? And I think so, but luckily this is exactly the type of stuff and exactly the way that I like questions. So now to play out the most overly politically correct stance here before I dive in deeper with my answers, and let's just say that the answers to any and all of the above is going to be, of course, it depends. Of course it depends. When it comes to the messiness of the path along skill acquisition to reach movement mastery in sport, that's always going to be the answer because every situation is n equals 1. However, I'm not into ambiguous things, so let me take a little bit more stand here as well. For starters, I believe this is a very important topic because we have some very smart people who exist on both sides of the fence with the idea of conscious awareness during skill execution. Of course, there are going to be those individuals that you can think of, such as Rich Masters and Gabby Wolf, and others who believe that too much conscious awareness and both, in the form of explicit monitoring is going to be detrimental for both performance as well as for learning. And these individuals go on to suggest that the constrained action that's often witnessed under conditions of pressure and fatigue or anxiety will then be traced back to, or could be traced back to, being organized in a too explicit a fashion, or in other terms or other words, with too much conscious awareness. There would be others in an opposite camp who would appear to be in opposition to some of these ideas, such as anyone who believes in a more traditional approach to skill acquisition, which usually will involve perfect practice or the repeating of a movement solution with lots of attention being paid to a particular way of carrying out and executing a respective skill with usually lots of feedback from a coach. For me, the gist of Stu's question really speaks to the formation of a movement solution for a respective motor problem. You will probably know if you've heard me talk anytime before that I refer to this solution as the biodynamic structure of the movement skill. Namely, the interconnectedness of the processes at the behavioral, the brain, and the biomechanical levels as the human movement system will work to coordinate, control, and organize a solution to the respective problem. The behaviors such as the sensory and perceptual processes in where one's sensory attention will flow, the brain, such as the cognitive processes around one's decision making and one's intention, and then finally the biomechanics that will emerge from that, which is the actual technical execution of the motor output. So earlier, when I say it depends, I believe that we must start there with that biodynamic structure. Let's remember, contrary to popular belief, or what you'll probably read through individuals, 140 character tweets, movement in sport is extraordinarily complex, and its execution is very multi-layered. No matter what though, with both how I'm about to answer Stu's questions, or how anyone else would go about answering them, you will of course see a great amount of theoretical beliefs at play. Of course, with myself, you will likely see a great influence from individuals such as the likes of Nikolai Bernstein and Carl Newell, and other ecological psychologists or advocates of dynamical systems theory as well as nonlinear pedagogy. However, even with that, I believe no theory in motor control or motor learning can completely explain the optimal solution for every motor